Dan Poulter's assessment of the Conservative Party is a damning one. He says you've become a nationalist party, you've lost your compassion. It's a sign of real rot, isn't it, that he's done this?
Well, I don't accept what Dan is saying at all. He talked about the NHS as a priority. Well, of course, the NHS was one of only 2 departments that was protected during those years of necessary spending restraint after the last Labour government bankrupted the country. As we heard earlier, we're now spending £165 billion a year on the NHS. That's more than ever at any point in history. It's a 13% increase above inflation just over the last 4 or 5 years alone. In just the last year, the NHS has hired an extra 68,000 people, of whom 7,000 are doctors. That's a net increase. And there are 21,000 more nurses today than there were a year ago. That isn't a sign of a party deprioritising the NHS. That is a sign of a political party, the Conservatives, investing heavily in our NHS because it is a priority.
But as Conservatives themselves would very often say, it's not just about the money. What Dan Poulter is saying is it's also about values. And he is saying that the Conservative Party now is not the Conservative Party he joined in 2010, that it's lost its compassion and it doesn't value public services in the way he thinks he ought to. And he also told me he believes some of his now former Tory colleagues share his views.
Well, I just don't accept that. Look, I'm Police Minister and I work closely with police every day of the week. If you ask any police officer or chief constable who I've met or dealt with, they will say the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister and I hugely value the sacrifice they're making working for the public. The same is true of workers in the NHS, school teachers and so on.
Don't you think every teacher, everyone in the NHS, every police officer would say they feel the Conservative government values what they do? Well,
I would hope they do, because we do value what they do, and that's why we're investing, as I say, record amounts of money in both education and health. It's why we've got record numbers of police officers. And on your question about results, we've obviously gone through a very difficult pandemic. We've had unprecedented strikes in the NHS. And despite those challenges, waiting lists are now reducing. They've come down by...
They have been at a record level.
I think you would, in fairness, Laura, acknowledge that was due to COVID and the strikes. They are now coming down. They've been coming down in a sustained way for the last 5 months by 200,000.